Outside the Box Reviews. We're beginning the annual Halloween vlogs for 2018. Throughout the month, I will be posting reviews of horror collectibles, horror movies, and various haunted attractions. I hope you will join me as I document the best month of the year. So, as the Halloween season begins, I want to do kind of what I've done. I know I did last year, I forget if I did it before that, but I'll just do some quick reviews on horror movies I'm watching. Some I've seen before, some I haven't. But today we're starting off with one that I hadn't seen before, and this is the Changeling. This movie came out, I think, in 1980, if I remember right. It stars George C. Scott, and it's a basic haunted house movie. These are the kind of movies that I find are hard to go back to. Haunted house movies, especially ones that are based on true events, and I believe this one supposedly is based on true events, it can only ever go so far. People normally aren't going to die, or if they do, it's going to be very tangentially linked to what's going on in the movie. And a lot of the things you see in it are things that I've seen a lot in movies that came later. There's a seance scene that is very, very reminiscent of the one done in Insidious, but not quite as stylized. There are some creepy moments. There's some kind of Amityville kind of stuff going on at points, which Amityville I think was out before this. So, I don't know. I don't feel like it was very original, but I feel like I'm coming at it from the wrong place to be able to say that with any authority, because I am not entirely sure what came before and what came after this film. It was fine if you need another haunting movie in your life. I'm kind of sick and tired of ghost stories, and just as a personal preference, probably not one I'll revisit anytime in the near future, but I did probably like it a little more than your average modern ghost movie, which I find really annoying for a lot of the tropes that the genre has picked up recently.
I forgot to film this, but I got the Fright Rags Frightville novelties. They're basically like old school style decorations done based on the movie Trick or Treat. So we got Sam there in the background, we got the vampire up here in the front, and then it's kind of hard to move around without messing stuff up, but a lot of the different kids from the school bus are in here as well. I think another unmasked Sam head is in there. So that was pretty cool.
So I watched Terrifier, and for whatever reason, going back to the movie, I couldn't find a title screen quickly, so you're just going to have to deal with the Netflix page here. I have mixed opinions about this one. I thought the kills were pretty inventive. I thought, for once, it was actually a clown character in a movie that was unsettling to the point where it was kind of creepy. I don't know. Clowns usually I don't find particularly scary, especially because a lot of them I feel like they try too hard and they try to make them too scary in movies and haunted houses and things. But this kind of like sits right at that edge for me where it's a clown that's just unsettling because it's a clown and it's a little dirty and decayed looking, but not so over the top. So I think that kind of worked for me. The story itself, I really didn't care for. I found myself bored a lot when it was just the character moments. And I'm not going to go into like spoilers or anything, but some of the ways that they presented the events in the film kind of annoyed me because, yeah, they seemed kind of unnecessary or weird or just out of order. So this one I don't know if I could recommend or not. I actually asked a couple of my friends to watch it just to see what their opinion was, because I really couldn't make up my mind on how I felt about this movie. And one friend hasn't watched it, the other one watched about 20 minutes and shut it off because he couldn't stand it. So I guess the verdict seems to lean more towards the it's horrible side of things. But I know this is a popular one. This has been getting a lot of like shirts and stuff I've seen. I've seen a lot of people posting about it online. I don't know. I think I would recommend it slightly. It's got some good slasher kills in it, like I said. Some are a little over the top and ridiculous and kind of Hatchet level, which is fine. Obviously, I love Hatchet, but when it's a character that they don't really ever show as having superhuman strength, they seem a little odd. Victor Crowley can kind of get away with a lot because it's like, you know, Kane Hodder on crack. But this seems like it's just a normal dude. I don't know if there's backstory for him. I know he's in another movie, but I don't think they really go much into him there either. I haven't seen, I don't even remember the name of the movie. That was like All Hallows Eve or something like that. Haven't seen that one. But yeah, I know this clown's in another movie. I just have to I guess, see what else it is. I don't know if this movie pushed me enough to want to find out, but I'd give it a mild recommend.
So while traveling, I stopped in at a Halloween city in Daytona, Florida. I don't have any Halloween cities near me. It's all Party City, and this is kind of like an extension of them. But this is kind of more jam-packed with Halloween costumes and accessories and decorations. And one of the things I found really interesting is they seem to have a better selection of Trick or Treat Studios masks than the Party Cities do, but they had some good options there. So I just stopped off at this Halloween city in Daytona, Florida while I was driving through. But while I was coming across the parking lot, I don't know if you could see it from here, but kind of off behind those trees over there, and where I'm heading next, that's a Spirit Halloween. So 2 Halloween stores virtually in the same parking lot. Kind of cool. I did pick up the new Stranger's mask, the man, the male character. Not sure how I think about it. It's a little green. It's a little weird looking, but we'll see when I get it on a mannequin head and see how it displays. Alright, I'm going to go head into Spirit Halloween. I'm not really expecting to find anything that unique because I've been to several up by me, but just because it's in the same shopping center as a Halloween city, I feel compelled to go in. And there's a Halloween megastore right across the street from all the rest of that crap, so yeah, nice little trifecta. So there wasn't really anything worthwhile in the Halloween megastore except for these really cool looking Jason masks that seemed to be made by a local customizer, but they were pretty authentic looking, but a little more than I wanted to spend, and plus they were masks I already have versions of. So, I am not in my normal spot for doing these movie review videos. I am actually driving through Orlando right now on my way to Tampa, but I did want to talk about the movie I saw last night, brand new theatrical film, Hellfest, which once I realized it wasn't a documentary about the French heavy metal festival, I found out was kind of a slasher movie that takes place in a haunted, it's not a haunted house, it's a haunted theme park, more or less. And these kind of movies tend to sucker me in. Last year on these videos I reviewed The House is October Built. I recently watched, I can't remember if I filmed a review for it yet, but Hell House LLC, and they always kind of leave me cold because I love going to Halloween Horror Nights every year, and I've been trying to push myself to go to some more of the smaller independent haunts around town, things like that. And it's just one of those things that to me is a very important Halloween tradition. So when I see it in movie form, I want to see something a little more true to what it actually is. And usually these movies either get it wrong, or they just end up not doing it justice, or having really gimmicky, crappy found footage elements to them. But I will say, for the most part, Hellfest seemed pretty true to like a Halloween Horror Nights environment. There were a few things that were kind of awkward, like the outside areas of the haunted houses would be packed full of people, and then as soon as our group of characters would go into a house, they would basically have a private tour of the house by themselves. But the whole story kind of predicates on this one guy in this weird-looking mask that comes into the park, and it's following our group of characters around. I will say it is a very bland group of characters, and they hint at some backstory with them, but they never explain it, and it's actually kind of just really lame character building. But we watch them follow the group around, and they start getting freaked out when they realize that he's not just allocated to one house, but is kind of roaming the grounds, and then he starts picking off the group one by one, as you would expect in a horror film. And I won't go any further with spoilers or anything, but I will say that the kills in the movie, they needed to be better. They were okay. The first couple of at least the main group of kids were decent, actually. I thought they were maybe not quite so inventive, but they were gory enough for an R-rated theatrical film. And I feel like if an unrated DVD came out, you'd probably get to see a little more of those effects, and it may look better or it may look worse, depending on how much of a budget they had for those things. There's really just two, I don't even want to call them inventive kills. One was kind of inventive, but pretty obvious, and the other one was something I've seen many, many times, but it just at least wasn't somebody just stabbing someone with a knife, basically. And if you're going to see the movie for Tony Todd, you can probably watch the trailers and get most of what he does. He has a lot of voiceovers throughout the park, but you really only see him on screen for a very short amount of time. And then just to kind of nitpick the haunted house aspect of things, they didn't need a slasher going through these haunted houses chasing after the kids. They really just needed to set the house on fire, and they would have killed everybody inside. Because for some reason, all these houses, even in an emergency situation, the lights never come on, like the house lights never come on, and the exits all seem to be hidden, and you have to like bang around on the walls to figure out how to get out of the maze, which, yeah, that just would be a major safety hazard and not something you could do in a real haunted house. And I'll say my overall impression of the movie was that it's about as okay as a movie can get. It's not great, it's not that bad. It is just super solidly, thoroughly okay. And I've seen some sites touting this as the return to old school slasher films and all this stuff, and it really isn't. It doesn't have the fun of old school slashers. A lot of it actually feels more like it's trying to be, maybe not a Scream postmodern slasher, but it's trying to be very contemporary in what it's doing. Not in a clever way, but just in a more, let's make this as PC as possible, and it kind of just makes it bland and somewhat uninteresting in parts, which is definitely a bummer. So whether to give it a recommend or not, that is really hard, because when something is just the epitome of fine, is that recommendable? I think if you have nothing better to do, and this is like a really crappy recommend, but if you are bored and you need to go out and see a movie to pass the time and nothing else is in theaters yet, I mean, we're in a month where we have the new Halloween movie and the Suspiria remake, and you know, there might be a couple other things that I can't remember offhand coming out. If you have nothing better to watch, it's a weak recommend, but there was an appropriate movie to go see last night because, as I mentioned, I'm driving. Well, obviously I'm driving right now. I am on my way to Tampa, and I'm going to Howl-O-Scream tonight at Busch Gardens, which is a Halloween event similar to Halloween Horror Nights, but I've heard a lot of great things about it, and I'm very excited to get a chance to finally go. So I just got to Busch Gardens for Howl-O-Scream. I haven't been to Busch Gardens probably in about 20 years now that I think about it. I think it was 1999 was the last time, or 1998 would have been the last time I would have come here. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Night is falling fast. I think it's going to be dark by the time it opens in about half an hour. So let's get going.
What are you looking at?
So as you might have noticed from that first clip from Howl-O-Scream, there really are very few places where you can get away from the scare actors at the event. It's Halloween Horror Nights, everything's pretty normal until you walk through the gates of Universal Studios, and then you're kind of descending into the horror. Here, I didn't capture it on video, but some of the trams bringing you from the parking lot into the theme park had scare actors on them. When you get right off the tram, before you get in, before you even buy your tickets, if you're buying on site, there are scare actors
everywhere. And that never really stops once you get into the park. There are a few areas where it didn't seem like there were scare actors. I went and grabbed something to eat. There weren't people jumping out at me from behind the chicken fingers or anything. But all the main paths of the park that were open, with one notable exception, were pretty much filled with something Halloween based. Whether it was the queue for a house, random scare actors that roamed around, scare zones, or these weird little like DJ booth areas they had set up. So just in terms of immersion, I think Howl-O-Scream does an amazing job. So at the time I'm filming this, it's been like a week since I was at the event, so I am going to be using a map. But just like with my normal Halloween Horror Nights adventures, I am going to talk about each piece individually, each house, each scare zone. I did film out in the scare zones. Obviously you can't really film in the house, or I don't think you're supposed to film in the house, but nobody was really enforcing it, so I saw there were quite a few people that actually were doing that. But, I mean, I was trying to be respectful to everybody else and to not be that guy with a bright cell phone in a dark haunted house. I also did their front of the line pass. They have a couple different versions of this, but this one works just for the houses. There's another one that works for the rides. But unlike Universal Studios, they give you a limit. So there's 6 houses, so that card, as you saw there were punch holes at the bottom, it's supposed to work 6 times. So you do have to be a little strategic with how you use it, unless you just plan on doing each house once. So the first house I did was Deathwater Bayou. It's kind of your stereotypical New Orleans voodoo style house. I feel like every haunted attraction I've gone to in the last like 2 years has had one of these in some way, shape, or form. But it's an aesthetic I like, so it's kind of cool going through. All the houses at Howl-O-Scream are very dark, especially compared to Universal, and I'm sorry to keep bringing that up, but that is the biggest comparison point as far as a theme park with a haunted attraction that I have. But they had some really good scares in there. The theming was really well done. Basically brings you through this swamp, and you're going through all the creepy voodoo shacks and then just the swamp itself. There's people jumping out at you from all corners. There's even some really cool like bungee effects in there with actors like basically flying down from the trees. And then it spits you out into kind of a Bourbon Street looking back alley area, which I don't really get. I'm assuming there's some kind of storyline there. These houses at Busch Gardens tend to be multi-year houses. So I guess there's like a building story with a lot of these. So maybe I just don't get what was necessarily going on, unless it was you're leaving the swamp and back to civilization. I don't really know, but it was enjoyable. I really like the theming on it. I did do every single house twice, so I will kind of comment on both runs. The first one was very early in the day. I did use my fast pass, but it was really unnecessary. I almost walked right on. And as is normal in these kind of houses, they split everybody up into groups. If you're not with a large group, I was by myself, so you just kind of get stuck with several other people when you go through, just to kind of break everything up for the scare actors. And I ended up, in my second run, being at the front of the group. And it was so dark in there, I actually got turned around twice and was going the wrong direction. It was definitely a bit of a confusing house, but very enjoyable. And after Deathwater Bayou, there was the first scare zone I encountered. Even though I'm not really sure it's much of a scare zone. It was Dia de los Muertos, which wasn't really done up in a style that seemed very horrific. It was very kind of traditional looking, as people in like sugar skull masks and classic Mexican clothing. And they were just kind of dancing around the streets. And there was one guy that had like this giant skeleton costume that came up over his shoulders, and you were supposed to not pay attention to the guy, just see this giant skeleton going down the street. But it was very stylized. They had some shrines like they do for the actual holiday. It wasn't a scare zone necessarily. It was just kind of like, I don't know. It makes me think of something you'd see in the World Showcase at Disney, where you're just like, oh, look, here is another culture's way of celebrating Halloween, or this time of year. Next up, I went to the first of the 2 new houses they have this year. Not that it means anything to me, because it's all new to me, but Insomnia. And this was really cool. It was kind of themed around a psych lab. I realized more the second time I went through. It's supposed to be like sleep experiments, where they're basically putting people into their own nightmares or depriving them of sleep, I guess insomnia.
so that they're forced to live their nightmares in the waking world. Kind of a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of thing without Freddy. I thought the theming in this was great. It really felt like you were going through the psychiatric hospital, which I know is kind of like standard at Halloween events, but it looked really cool. They had some neat things where you'd see things through a window and, you know, maybe it popped out around the corner, maybe it didn't, maybe it was just this vignette into whatever was going on. And the further you went in, the more crazy it got. You kind of left the quote-unquote real world behind and you were just trapped in these nightmares. There's scenes where, really straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street, where like everything's turned upside down or on the wall. You see people floating above their beds in these cool trippy tunnels. There's an amazing scene with counting sheep where basically you see on the wall there's just these like sheep jumping as a kind of a projection, and then you come around the corner and some woman's being eaten alive by a sheep. It looks like something straight out of Black Sheep, not the Chris Farley movie, but the horror movie. There's a room where the walls are moving subtly side to side, so it kind of gives you this feeling like you're just almost like you're drunk going through this hallway. Really off-putting. And there's even the classic Freddy Krueger, you know, in the original movie where he pushes himself out through the wall. They basically redid that in live action. It was really effective. I really hope that house comes back again because I'd love to do it again next year. That was just a fantastic time. So at this point, this is when I went and grabbed the map because I wasn't really sure where I was going next. Busch Gardens kind of is a loop, but it has little bits that juts out. So I wasn't really sure where I was going. And I was just having trouble figuring out where the path was to continue on. So I basically ended up back at the front of the park and started going what I seem to think is the actual correct direction, going clockwise around the park. And even the map numbers it like this, so I guess that makes more sense. But as I started off from the front of the park again, I hit another scare zone. This was called Hell on Wheels. It was like a zombie-themed scare zone. They had some really cool cars in there, kind of decked out like Mad Max, Dawn of the Dead remake zombie vehicles things. There were some guys going around. I don't know if they were supposed to be zombies or what, but they had like leaf blowers that they were shooting at people.
Playing with a reed blower.
Just kind of thinking, you know, chainsaws are a classic at these Halloween events, but you can't just get any kind of power tool and expect it to be scary. There were also these cages that looked like they were supposed to have zombies in them. But when I first went through, there was nobody in them. I've seen other people's videos and it looks like they should be populated. But since I was there right when the park opened, I guess they never really had time to get the actors in there before I was going through. It seemed like they should have had ample time because I'd done 2 houses by this point. And then when I made my second loop around the park, it had started raining and having a thunderstorm, and once that happens, you kind of have to pull the scare actors off the street, unfortunately. By the time I went through there again, there were no actors out, so it was still empty cages and basically empty streets. I also noticed that coming from the front of the park, you just saw the vehicles, and if you're going the opposite direction, you see some signs that kind of tell you about the zombie theme. I noticed that later on, when it was quieter, that you could actually hear like a radio broadcast playing, talking about what to do. But seeing as it almost seems intentional by the numbering on the map, you're supposed to go clockwise around the park, it feels like that sign telling you the kind of theming should have been opposite. So they almost should have flipped the scare zone around for it to make a little more sense to most people going through it. Third house I went to was Unearthed. This is another one that is, I guess, a classic for this event. And it was interesting. They hand out flashlights as you're going through, and you're kind of going into these caverns, and it looks like a dig site. They have some Lion Q stuff playing, talking about things going on at the dig site and people going missing. But once you get in, it's not really much of a dig site. It feels like you're in like people's living rooms for the most part, and it's all very like structural. There's very few parts in it where you feel like you're inside of a cave or something. So the theming confused me a little bit, but it was pretty cool. There were some neat effects in there overall. One of my favorites the first time through is they had these kind of like monsters coming out of the dirt. There's this big pair of jaws. I assumed it was people's hands in them just operating these giant jaws. But the second time I went through, they were like barely moving. I don't know if somebody was on a break or what, but I was glad I got to see it work well once.
I also did notice the second time through that it is really dark in the house. The second time through I actually had the flashlight, so I was the one that was supposed to be illuminating the path. But the first time through I felt like I could see okay, but somebody else was using the light, so I was probably following their light. The second time through I realized it was really dark, but before I even had a chance to turn my flashlight on, the guy in front of me just turned his cell phone light on, which was like way too bright, so it really just illuminated everything too much. So, I wish I could have had a chance to be the flashlight holder, but I didn't even bother turning it on because this guy was just, wanted daytime lighting in there, I guess. Which I don't get. If you're going to go to a haunted house, like, enjoy it for what it is. Don't try to screw up, everybody else's experience because you're scared, I guess. I don't know. The next scare zone and house were kind of off to the side on their own. This was labeled as a 17 and up house, which was really a suggestion. It's not like they were IDing people going in, but I guess because of that they have it down the street where really you go through the scare zone and it ends in the house rather than just the scare zone being the normal path around the park. So the scare zone was called Meat Market. The house was called Simon's Slaughterhouse. It kind of gives you a rough idea. Very Texas Chainsaw Massacre-ish thing going on. The Meat Market was pretty cool. They had like 50s music playing through it and just various, creepy cuts of meat around and some scare actors jumping out at people. They were also serving like turkey legs in there, which I thought was kind of like sick and awesome.
The camera drops to the flashing machine. They can drive are mechanically trimmed as they move along the production line.
Yeah, I got it. I'm not going to get that drink unless
or other products.
And then the house itself kind of continues on that theming. You go through the front, and they actually have scare actors outside the house, like shoving you into the 3 different doorways. There's one for cattle, there's one for poultry, there's one for pigs. So they kind of split you up a little bit and send you in, and then you really just reunite with everybody right inside. I saw that in a couple of houses. Death Water Bayou had that as well, where you could go on 2 paths, but they just met back up again. But you're going through, there's like animal-human hybrid-looking people with tasers threatening you. And then you basically go through the whole thing with Simon's Slaughterhouse, is that it's like a game of Simon Says. So, if you do what Simon says, you'll make it through. But when the thing Simon is saying is like die or burn, you're kind of screwed anyway, I guess. But you're basically going through watching them slaughtering humans for meat, and it gets progressively worse as you go. You're seeing people have to like puke in buckets. You're seeing people being like skinned. You're seeing people being ground up. And then kind of once they've like gotten rid of all the flesh, there's a part where they're burning the bones and burning the rest of the bodies. The effects are pretty good. I guess this is 17 and up because it's really bloody. Some of the other houses I had blood in them, but I guess just because this is just so much meat, they felt like it had to be 17 and up. I'm not really sure. I'm probably way too desensitized to horror movie stuff to even begin to tell you why they would make it 17 and up, but it was enjoyable. It was another one of the new ones. I wouldn't be brokenhearted if it didn't come back next year, but it was decent.
You have arrived.
So back across the way from Unearthed is the house that I will say is my absolute favorite of the event. This was Motel Hell. I guess this is a long-running house there. And as the name suggests, it's not based on the movie, but it is a haunted motel. And the outside facade looks so much like a real motel, and that never stops when you walk in there. It feels like a real crappy motel. It's great. It's really just the theming of it is so well done. I was very impressed.
You walk in, they start playing this like distorted version of Mr. Sandman. You go to the check-in office where people are like ghosts and jumping out at you. You go through different rooms and see people being murdered. You go through the laundry room and see somebody being like laundered to death, I guess. There's a part you're going down the hallway, there's chainsaws sticking out of everything, and then somebody comes from the ceiling with a chainsaw at you. Then eventually you get outside to the pool area, and there's a body like dead in the sandbox. There's a guy grilling, threatening you with the grilling utensils. Somebody tries to scare you with shuffleboard. I think shuffleboard in itself is scary, just because it's shuffleboard, but that was a weird kind of scare. And then there's a really cool effect where you see like a picnic table and there's nobody at it. And they're using like a mirror effect so that when you get to the other side, there's somebody behind it and they kind of materialize out of nowhere. And then you get out the back end and you're outside of the house, but there's like broken down cars with ghosts and just kind of like, I don't even know what to call it. It's just cars that look like they ran over children and people and have zombies coming out of them. Yeah, my favorite house. It was so good. Even on the second run through where there was nobody at the end because of the storm, it was still fantastic. The next scare zone was Deadly Toys, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of like roaming characters, and there's a pathway leading up to Deadly Toys that's very dark, and there's no scare zone there. But there were a ton of people in like ghillie suits in the bushes jumping out at you, and despite being pitch black, it made this innocuous looking path kind of turn into its own scare zone. My second time through, there was a little kid with his family up in front of me, and one of the actors jumped out, scared the kid, and he got kind of mad, and he saw the second one, and he was like eyeing the second person coming up. It's like, you're not gonna scare me, I see you there. And then kid got past the actor then jumped out. That kid, I swear he ran 20 feet in half a second. It was hilarious, and yes, I am a horrible person for thinking that's hilarious, but it was hilarious. So then you go into Deadly Toys, which starts off with a guy in a bear mask with free hugs written across his chest wielding a chainsaw at you. The second run through, I didn't get it on film, but there was a guy in a rabbit costume and a very similar kind of motif. And then you run into kind of like girls dressed as creepy dolls.
So Horror Nights has chainsaw clowns. Here we have chainsaw bears.
Here, audio piped in that's like children looking for their parents. There's another bungee effect somewhere in there. There's like a crashed toy train. There's some toy boxes that look creepy. It's not the best. I kind of wish it was more of the toys with chainsaws, to be quite honest, but overall I thought it was decent. The audio, when I went through it again after it started raining and there were no actors out, the audio itself is pretty unsettling by itself. It's just very, you put a little kid crying for their parents, it becomes creepy enough. So then you go through the one section of the park that didn't really have any scare actors or anything. I'm not really sure what this is typically. I haven't been there during the day in forever, but it's basically there's like a central exhibit, I think it's a birdhouse type thing, and a ramp that goes up either side of it, and for whatever reason it's just this long stretch where there's nothing there. I think because it's a ramp, they didn't want to be scaring people and having them maybe slip. So it's kind of a dull section. And then you cross this bridge where they kind of put like rave lights in, but once again there's nothing happening on that bridge. So it's just kind of just dull stretch in the middle of the park. And I believe it was on the other side of this where there was another kind of area of characters, but it wasn't really a defined scare zone. This was kind of that haunted park staple of people with like metal pads, I guess, on their knees and their wrists and things, so they'll like run at you and then like hit the ground and shoot up sparks. It was cool, it was interesting, it was kind of fun. That was just kind of an ill-defined scare zone that wasn't really a scare zone. So the last house for the night was the Black Spot. This is a pirate-themed house. It looks like it's inside of a ride queue. I think by there is one of their like water rides that they have at the park. Once you come through, there's kind of this like cove looking area leading into the house itself. They had some outside actors the first time I went through, which really helped kind of give you the idea that there's something going on. And you're basically walking into the ship. I could never get the theme of the ship. It seemed like it was like cannibal ghost pirates? I'm not really sure if that's what was going on, but that's what it felt like. Because it seemed like they were trying to like eat you or boil people, but they were also like eating rats. So I'm not really sure what was going on. The house was very, very short. A group in front of me the first time through were like basically running through the house, and I kind of have a bad habit of just trying to keep up with whoever's in front of me in these kind of things. So I went through it very, very quickly. But I will say the second run, I went through almost equally quickly just because I wasn't very entertained with it. At the end, there's like a pirate in a crow's nest. Then you walk out and somebody's like yelling at you about something. But it was really a lame house. It was very, very short. It didn't make much sense. I think they could have done something better with a pirate theme, but I think they'd be better off just not keeping it. The second time I went through it was when that storm started. I had used up my fast pass and I was waiting in line. It was just because I wanted to do all the houses over again. I was basically just stuck in this line for a long, long time. It was a very long wait. It was a very cramped ride queue. The lanes were just barely wide enough for people, and then you'd have people like sitting on the rails of the line queue, so they're like halfway into the other lane where there's not really enough room for a person anyway. That wait was definitely not worth the house that came out of it. So this kind of puts you in a weird position, especially if you're like me and you weren't planning on doing rides, because basically the black spot is the furthest house away from the entrance, and there's still a lot of park connecting that back to the area where Insomnia was. So if you're not planning on doing the rides, there's really only some scare zones up at that top part of the park. So it makes going through there kind of weird. The next one I went on to was Camp DOA, which is kind of like every horror movie set at a campground all smashed into one. So there's like redneck counselors yelling at you, there's like monsters in there. There was some kind of cool theming, but they also like seemed very vague on the camp. Like there were cabins, there were RVs, there were tents, there were teepees. It's just kind of like, this is how a camp normally works as far as I'm aware. You normally have like maybe one or two of these things. But the theming was pretty cool. Scare actors seem to tend to be like up inside some of these props. So they weren't really interacting with guests too much, but there were a couple moments where they got right to the faces of people. But it felt just a little uninteractive when I went through it. Once again, the second time I went through, it was empty. So when you get out of Camp DOA, you get one of the themed rides they have. And from some other people's videos, it almost looks like there are scare actors on some of the rides as well. But this specifically, the bumper cars, they theme out, this time with like evil clowns. And I guess in the past it had been zombies, and these were just clowns that acted like zombies. So I don't know why it wasn't zombies again. I didn't go on it, but it looked like it was interesting at least. It's just bumper cars, but you have monsters in there with you. And then that leads you, I guess, following the clown theme to what they call the Maniac Midway. It's the kind of section of the park that has a lot of like carnival style games and stuff, and you just filled that with evil clowns everywhere you went. There was one clown that was like kind of a contortionist, or at least she was able to like bend over backwards really far. So that was kind of a cool, creepy moment. And then you get out of that section, and then you're down this other path where there's kind of similar to the people with the sparking pads. These are people with like shovels. They'll hit on the ground, send up sparks. That was kind of cool. It also came up to another like area where there was a hearse. It was pretty neat looking.
Maggie's nails created a
I grabbed it.
Oh, he's that's my last. I found one. Oh my
So that was Howl-O-Scream. I had a really good time, and I already am planning to go back next year. That was just fantastic. Really my biggest complaint, and some of it wasn't the park's fault, was the scare zones. When I got there, right when they opened, it seemed like the scare zones weren't ready yet. They seemed underpopulated. I have watched some other YouTubers talk about their experience going through, and all the scare zones seemed like they had more people, more scares. And I don't know if they were understaffed that night or if they were just slow to get out to the scare zones, but some of the ones I went through, especially the ones kind of up front, seemed like they were really lacking actors. And my plan was to go back through and see them more populated once I'd gone through my second round of houses. But by that point, the storm hit and they had to pull the actors in. And even at the houses themselves, there were actors that were kind of in the outside areas of the houses, and those had to be pulled as well. So like the guy in the crow's nest at Black Spot and some of the actors at the end of Motel Hell and things like that had to be pulled, which was a bit of a bummer. If I was going to rank the houses, I would say Motel Hell for sure, #1. Insomnia might be my #2. I think that kind of cemented it after my second run through there. That was my second favorite. Close follow-up, #3 of Deathwater Bayou. I guess maybe I'd go with Simon's Slaughterhouse for #4. #5 would be Unearthed. And then the last place, bottom of the barrel, is Black Spot for sure. I will also say, as I mentioned, I got their Fast Pass. I went through everything the first time with the Fast Pass. At least on the night I went, and this was the last weekend of September. The Fast Pass was kind of unnecessary. I did get to do everything twice, but I left well before the park was going to close. So I probably could have gone again twice with just the normal pass. The lines weren't very long. I think if you're going maybe early season, that's not opening weekend, because I think this was their second weekend, so it wasn't opening weekend, and it wasn't in October yet, so maybe that was just a sweet spot where you could get in and get through things pretty quickly without having to stress about it. But that was a great way to get into the spirit for the month of October, the Halloween groove, and in just over a week as of my recording this, I am going to be heading to Halloween Horror Nights down in Orlando for that annual ritual, and I am so excited for that. So I'll be back probably next week with another more standard vlog with no big haunted attraction in there, but the video after that will be Halloween Horror